Hi, you guys, you're live.
Are we allowed to talk?
Oh, good.
Yep, you're live.
Sashi, Rob.
How are you?
Hi, Andre.
How are you? Sorry about the.
Hi.
I
Hi,
didn't-
everybody.
I forgot that we had a brand new link. So anyway, we're getting there. So where's Karen? Is she around? Or?
I'm sure she's coming.
Okay. And okay, sorry, Karen.
Yay!
Okay, we're all good now. So look, the easiest thing is we'll just start exactly the same.
We're live right now.
We're live. We'll go.
Oh, okay. Oh, that makes it very simple then. Okay. So let's rock and roll. So
let's rock and roll. Thank you,
Yeah,
Joe. Over to you.
Thanks, Joe. So look, what I'll do is just introduce you, Karen, and just say that from everybody, I'm Andre Loy. I'm the International Director of Regeneration International, and we've spent the last 24 hours hosting this show. You probably see by the looks on my face that I'm getting a little bit tired now, but it's been a wonderful 24 hours. I just want to thank everybody who's been involved. We started with the Pacific because that's where the day starts. It's also where the day ends. So we'll end with the Pacific. So I'd like to hand over to our host and moderator, Karen Matsua, the president of IFOAM Organics International. It's all yours, Karen, and thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Joe, if we can have our startup video, please. We can go straight to the next video, please, Scott. Talofalava, everybody, and welcome back to the Pacific. I'm here in Fiji, but we've got people from, again, all over the place joining us for a Talanoa tonight. 23 hours ago, we opened the summit in the Pacific and had a discussion with 4 organic growers from the Pacific Islands in what we call a Talanoa. And for those who aren't from the region or weren't here at the beginning, that's a term referring to a conversation or a chat, sharing ideas with someone. And it's a word that's used in several of our islands' languages. It can be a really formal thing, or it can be a conversation between friends, as we have tonight. And it can be used for different purposes, to teach a skill, to share information, to gather ideas, or resolve problems. But it's a really huge part and a really important part of building and maintaining relationships in the Pacific. At the opening, we talked a lot about Indigenous food systems and production, the connection between land and sea, and the importance of maintaining these systems to provide sustainable and nutritious food while supporting our environments and our deep connection to the land. When we were thinking about how to frame the opening and the closing of the People's Food Summit, it made sense if we were starting with grow, that we would finish with eating, with nourishment. So in this session, that's what we're looking at. The challenges and opportunities and some of the really cool things that are currently happening in the Pacific to promote healthy and sustainable diets. And of course, nourish makes that link back to the land as well, because we also recognize that food doesn't just nourish the body. It nourishes heart and spirit, and the way we produce it also can nourish our environments. So I've got 3 people joining me today for the Talanoa, from 2 chefs and 1 person who's worked in rural development for a very long time. Very, very happy and honoured to have you all join us today. I will introduce everyone one by one, and I thought the best way to do that was just to share a brief video that shows some of the work that these amazing people do. So we'll start off with Gabriel, or Gabby, who is from, he's a French Tahitian chef, but currently lives in New Caledonia. Joe, if we could maybe have the video for Gabby.
Friends from the South Pacific and the rest of the world, welcome to New Caledonia. This is an island in the middle of the South Pacific. It's a beautiful little island. It's a French territory. My name is Gabriel Levionois, and I'm a chef activist and a restaurant owner. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation around food systems. I have 2 propositions to make. The first one is the creation of Pacific Food Lab 7 years ago. With Pacific Food Lab, we want to co-create with the chefs and stakeholders of the food system a better food culture in order to face the challenges we are facing in the 21st century. We have created Pacific Food Lab in New Zealand as well with Professor Tracy Berno, and she is a scientist and deals with food politics at the Auckland University of Technology. One big event we have created a few years ago is called the Local Food Festival. And basically for 15 days we have the whole country, chefs, producers, stakeholders of the food system to celebrate our common good, which is food. Another event we have created is United Canteens. In French territories, the kids, they eat at school. They have a restaurant for kids. And basically we have all the chefs of all the canteens of the country now that gather in this event. And that represents 22% of the population. It's a big leverage action for the food system in New Caledonia. The second proposition I would like to make is culinary training on TV and social media. Basically, I've been a culinary trainer for 14 years now in the islands. I went to Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, Tahiti, and even New Zealand to provide culinary training and share my expertise, my knowledge. And we have invented with chefs and operators a concept called beneficial recipes. Recipes that are good for our communities, recipes that are healthy, recipes that are good for our local economy and have a low impact on the environment. There's no doubt that if we improve our recipes in our food culture, we will improve our food systems. So again, thank you for inviting me into this conversation, and I would like to finish with a little prayer. This food is the coming together of the great elements: the earth, the fire, the water, the air. It's the result of the work of many people around the world. May I prepare and eat it mindfully, and may it help me to contribute as a chef to the well-being of others and the purpose of the universe. Blessing on the food and blessing on this conversation.
Thanks so much. So that's Gabby. Our next participant and guest tonight is Robert Oliver, who is an Aotearoa New Zealand chef, but he has his roots in the Pacific with his formative years in Samoa and Fiji. Joe, if we can have Robert's video now.
The food and cuisine is quite simply the best in the world.
They'll cook for renowned judges and create dishes that bring Pacific Island cuisine into the spotlight, where one team will be named the Pacific's Best, Pacific Island Food Revolution.
What I love about the Pacific Island Food Revolution is its ability to connect to Pacific peoples through food. It speaks to individual cultures, individual islands in a way that no other program has used before.
We're looking at food as a solution to the NCD crisis. The NCD crisis is just a symptom of a food culture that's slightly off its own tracks, but can easily get people back onto its tracks.
I definitely see the opportunity for the Pacific Island Food Revolution to work in other sectors apart from health, particularly economy, social cohesion, attitudes of young people to their environment, that kind of thing.
I wanted to be involved with the program because, the answer to our problem lies in our own countries with our local foods.
When there's an episode of Pacific Island Food Revolution playing, it may last a certain amount of time. But the time that's spent discussing the episode, discussing the food, I think that's a key component of Pacific Island Food Revolution as a development tool. And if you can raise food warriors around the Pacific, then you'll raise a healthier Pacific.
For Vanuatu, this means, let's say, a whole new identity and a whole new perspective on what Vanuatu food culture is.
We learned a lot about their culture, our culture. There's some things that we didn't even know. It really helped us now because we're using this as in our cooking.
Everyone in the Pacific felt connected to it. They could relate to it.
To me, one of the best ways to get a message out there. We could write a report, we could make a speech, but frankly, few would listen, few would read it.
You always see cooking shows like MasterChef, but having it in a local context. It's very inspiring.
My kids, when you tell them that's what's cooked in the Pacific Food Revolution cooking show, then they'll start eating it.
It's exciting, interesting. Every time when the program comes on, everybody's happy. They want to go, oh, Daddy, put the TV on. We want to watch this.
I've seen the Pacific Island Food Revolution inspiring families to change the way they cook. It's no longer about, doctor, what do we need to eat? It's more them going, doctor, I saw this on the Pacific Island Food Revolution. I thought I might try this. What do you think?
We're getting young men to be in the kitchen cooking. Traditionally in our culture, we feel like it's the girl's job, but we try to bring that out in the program to say that it's a partnership in this.
We've really only just begun. I mean, we've had one season play in the Pacific Island countries, and having one show play once, it'll just create some sort of awareness. We need to go for a while yet.
The revolution begins with you, and that's what social change is. And the most obvious thing to change first is what goes in your mouth.
Fabulous. And finally, we have Sashi Kiran. Sashi is a partner in crime for me here in Fiji, although on the other side of the country, and the director of the Foundation for Rural Integrated Enterprises and Development, or FRIEND. If we can just have Sashi's videos up, please.
Did you know that you can make beautiful, delicious gluten-free roti from your leftover kakanandina? Yes, the boiled breadfruit, the boiled bundi, the boiled cassava that you have, you can make gluten-free roti out of it. Let's show you how. Any leftover kakanandina like breadfruit, boiled plantain, cassava, dalo or kumala can be chopped into small cubes to be put into the food processor. Blend on low setting until it's gently done in our dough. Remove and knead gently. Roll like a roti using a rolling board and pin, and cook on a hot plate or a hot tawa, and cook until it's golden brown on both sides. If you desire, you could also make your roti more nutritious and healthy by mixing chopped herbs, greens, leftover shredded fish or spices. So don't throw away that leftover kakanandina. You can turn them into beautiful, wholesome, nutritious meals for your whole family. Many families in Fiji are very blessed to be feeding their families real food. Hi, I'm Sashi from FRIEND. Do you know that you could develop a very resilient backyard garden with a range of leafy vegetables that does not need a lot of care? And you can feed your family whollier with a nice wide variety of nutrition. For example, this rosella. Rosella is a very resilient crop. You can use the leaves and the flowers. The seeds will keep dropping and it keeps growing each year. And then there are so many other varieties of vegetables. For example, this Malabar spinach. It grows wild, it's a creeper. Once you plant it, you never have to plant it again. And so versatile, it can be used so easily in your stir fries, stews, soups, salads. We have mother growing so widely and readily everywhere. We can use cassava leaves, kumala leaves, pumpkin leaves, and if you develop a small pond of watercress, it can give you leaves for throughout the year, and you can have variety of watercress in it. And this is the world-renowned superfood, Moringa, or sage as we know it. You can plant a cutting and it grows really well, or you can plant a seed, and once you've planted one plant, it'll give you vegetables for a lifetime. There you go. Resilient, easy to grow, leafy vegetables in your own backyard for nutritious meals for your families.
Thanks very much. I told you there was a lot of exciting things happening in the Pacific. There is so much happening in this space now that our food systems and our health has to turn around. So I'd like to move now to have a little bit of discussion with everybody and start with some questions just to get people thinking. And I'd like to direct my first question to Robert. Rob, you're clearly really passionate about identifying and promoting Pacific Island cuisine and gastronomy. What's the importance? Why?
I guess, I grew up in Fiji, then I lived in New York for many years, and I began to realize the value of cuisine as a proposition through the restaurant culture of New York, and that our cuisine was not represented there. And if you reflect on the word cuisine, it's a French word, right? And it's apt that it's a French word because it indicates the cultural system of food, cultural food. And just the word cuisine is lifted by the way that the French understand it and identifies through it. It denotes identity, it denotes excellence. And it also denotes a respect for the foundation, the original recipes, the stuff that came from nature, from grandma, all that kind of stuff. So the French cuisine has always remained true to its foundation and has evolved from there. In fact, like one of the probably the most beloved variant, which is cuisine maison, talks about home cooked food. If you move this concept to the Pacific, we probably know it better as local food. It's what we call local food is cuisine, and it's not the same as Pacific diet. We all know there's been issues with the diet in the Pacific due to the effects of globalization and colonization and the invasion of ultra-processed foods into the region. But there are many reasons to stick to the original. There's a lot hanging off that plate of food. And if you think about it, if you think about the local food proposition, local cuisine, local food, and the relationship, for example, to tourism, if you have local food in the tourism industry, it implies the link to local farmers and thus economy. Local food is healthy. It's full of nutrition. It's singing with nutrition. Even climate change, because if you are looking at a choice between local food and, say, processed food, just by choosing local food, you're participating in a positive climate change action. Many people find notions like climate change to be too big and something that governments and institutions should manage, but in food, it's everybody's business. Health and well-being, of course, biodiversity is maintained through the local cuisine system, which requires a whole basket of foods. And then local knowledge and medicinal knowledge and identity, all uplifted by that plate of food, by that plate of local food. Of course, organics is at the heart of that, which I know you love to hear, Karen.
Yes.
Because the organic certification system is just a legal framework for keeping things as they traditionally were, which is a high integrity and high value. So the story of the food is much more than what's on the plate. The story of the food is the story of the people. And it's like the plate, if you imagine a matrix of connections to all of those things, identity to medicinal knowledge, to climate change, to tourism, to all that. And then if you raise the cuisine, you raise all of that. So that's why I stay on the path with these other guys promoting and just cheerleading Pacific cuisine.
Thanks, Rob. That's amazing. And I really like that image of the web, all the connections that come out from the plate through all those really important things and supporting things like biodiversity through the way we eat. Sashi, you and Friend have worked on food security issues for a very long time in the region and in Fiji, but recently you've really been leading in providing food relief during the pandemic. That might look really different to the sort of things we've been talking about with Rob. What have you seen there and what have you learned about what we need to do to build resilience for future shocks?
Thank you, Karen. And it's such a pleasure to be with all this very important work that we're being done by Robert and Gabby in the region. So thank you. One of the things that is extremely saddening is that we find during the crisis or any crisis, one of the things that hits us is the need for food. So as soon as the pandemic hit or even a natural disaster hits, there is a call out for food need. And if you see, it shows us an extremely high dependence on processed foods. So people actually really demand rice and flour and pulses and canned food in a country that's abundant, abundantly has not only seafood around us, but grows beautiful food. But what's happened over time, like we saw in the videos, the modern crops or the more exotic crops that have been introduced, like the cabbages and, like the short-term crops is what most people plant. And there's not enough emphasis on perennial foods or the traditional foods that have been there, to the point that traditional foods have almost been considered backward. And there is not enough emphasis. Now, shows like Roberts tries to encourage or at least glamorizes the local food. And that's what has to happen, because you would be very surprised that even people who live by the coast and they have an abundance of wide variety of seashells and things, it just doesn't make it to the food table, which is what they used to live on. And that is something that has to change, because there is food, but people actually, when we talk to the parents, when we talk to the fathers in terms of crisis, and when people don't have employment, like right now in the pandemic, they feel very depressed that they are not able to feed their families food. They can access fish, maybe they can access dalanitana, the traditional foods that are around, the wild yams that are around, but they feel small that they can't feed their families the processed food, because when the economy turned and everybody is able to earn, it's fashionable or it's prestigious to be able to feed your families rice and canned foods and things like that. And I think that's a very worrying trend. And if there are future natural disasters, which does, each time we have to go through this whole process. And of course, we give seeds for short-term crops, but there needs to be much more work and much more connection to the roots. And if I may, Karen, before I stop, is the other big issue that we are seeing is that how do we bring the importance of traditional food back? The traditional food that we ate like 30 years ago that we were eating, the knowledge of that has gone in the last 30 years. So your younger people, if you say you can actually eat taro leaves, taro leaves is more common, or cassava leaves or kumala leaves, there's almost a shock that, oh no, that cannot be eaten. Whereas our forefathers have eaten that. So that knowledge of how to prepare traditional foods, how to preserve foods for natural disasters, that has gone. So now it's extra hard work to actually not only think about growing a lot of these foods and but how to prepare, how to preserve. So each time there's a natural disaster, we have food. But more importantly, countries like Fiji are suffering massive malnutrition. Even prior to the pandemic, 80% of our children below the age of 2 are said to be anemic. More than 40% of our population is said to be anemic. And this is a country that is very blessed with the green vegetables, traditional crops. So now the whole relearning is something that there's a lot more focus that needs to happen, Karen.
Thanks, Sashi. And that strikes me. That's only 30 years. It's not even a generation. So we need to act really quickly to find that knowledge before it does disappear forever. Gabby, I've got an interesting question for you, because we talk about the way food is produced in many different ways and the different values it has. What would you say that a bite, a mouthful of regenerative food tastes like?
I guess it would taste good. It would be nourishing. It would be pleasant to eat and to share. That would be maybe a mouth bite of this great food culture that we need to face the challenges we are facing with a smile on the face.
And how do you think that sort of relates to the work that you do in trying to promote Indigenous and local foods?
Basically, when we gather to eat, and we've been doing this since we're humans, there is something great happening. And the joy to be together, to eat together, to prepare the food together, and to see the result of your farmers and your fishermen on the table, to enjoy what's been harvested, is something very special. It opens up a space for the conversation to happen on the community level, on the family level. So I guess the work that I'm trying to do is to reinforce the capacity that we keep eating together the right food, joy on our face, and to make sure that the people that are not eating enough and don't have access to nutritious food and quality food, that we still have a plate for them on the table. It's very important to know what's happening when I'm eating. What is that act, social act I'm doing? And today we start to realize that eating is something important for me, but for my fellows, for my family, and for the rest of the world, for the soil. And actually, I guess when we do events like local food festivals, it's a way to ritualize the food that we have become, to ritualize the importance of food. And if I talk about my Polynesian ancestors, when we talk about Matariki in New Zealand, we consider food to be sacred somehow. If you celebrate your food and you take a moment to give a little prayer, I guess that's the way that you pay a consideration towards food. And if you consider the food you're eating, you consider yourself, you consider your family, and you consider the community you live in. So if Polynesian would probably say, the land does not belong to me, I belong to the land. Therefore, I belong to food. Food does not belong to me. It's a common good. So the work I'm doing is for the purpose of the great common good. That's what I've been taught with some people using participatory leadership. It's the capacity to gather people for a great project. And I love the double vaca that you shown on the video to start with. That's the voyage we need to enter together on the same vaca towards the food that is going to nourish our kids.
Fabulous, thank you. We'll just take a very short video break. If we can get the next video up, please, Joe, then we'll come back and have a continuation of the discussion.
Time go to poke to tangata kimua. Lawai ke nau Oceania ngai lele ko na mawang koto. Ai ke nau tori me ana new tengu na fe nuai. Na winu me ai mau me to ko ni pembe ka kalmi.
Basically, we are responding to the environmental degradation, making sure that the food are safe, that people will have a safe food system. But at the same time, we have a traditional way of doing things in Tonga, and commercial farming has killed it. But we are able now to restore and get young people to be interested in organic farming.
Kina ai pela ke mau na se ni ke to kon na family ku mga mia kai ke na kai
all our farmers are getting old, so we need to engage young people, but on a safe food systems and food structure.
지역의 빙하오더니 라바게 냥아 마예 일로가 가오게 나 이거에 니 버야 타임데요 알아게요 라이마데요 포토도 거다 벤베 라바게 또에
Food security, food safety, food sovereignty, these are issues that we need to be working on for the future of young people and the future of Tonga as a whole.
Great. So a little trip to Tonga. So thanks very much for your responses, everybody. There are a couple of things that came up for me really clearly. And one is the impact of colonization on our food system and how that has changed. Our tastes are changing, and there's a whole lot of issues around that. Also, that really important piece that it's not just about food for our bodies, that it's so much deeper than that. There's human connection, there's culture, there's everything on a plate of food. But there's a lot to do for us to really transform our food system so that we are, across the region, all well nourished. If I was to ask each of you, what is the one thing that you think would help transform our food system and lead to a really well nourished Pacific, what would it be? I know that's a hard question if you only have to pick one. So who would like to have a go?
I'll jump in to start off. I mean, I struggled with this question when I began designing Pacific Island Food Revolution, and it alludes to all the positives we've talked about the assets of the indigenous food system, but the fact that there's been this intervention with globalization and colonization. And I grew up in Fiji, you know, we all grow up wanting to go overseas and thinking everything from overseas is better. So it's very much a mindset thing. But I really, the reason I designed Pacific Island Food Revolution the way I did, which was really to activate local cuisine for young people, get young people involved in something that they may deem as boring because it's traditional. And that was by not telling people what to do, but by, you know, I've used entertainment as a modality, but I see that Gabby and Sashi doing exactly the same thing, and they're working through society and through social kind of movement type modalities. And something I just from years of working in development is I've often seen development projects miss that bit out, that social, that societal engagement, that magic that will make it last. And because it is the culture, is part of the culture. We know the culture is the solution. So if we fix it, it's going to stay there forever. And I don't feel despondent about it because I've seen the results from my project. I'm sure everyone can speak the same. That young people do want to be engaged. They do want to be the solution providers. They do want to carry the torch. They've just got to be given that platform to do so.
Fabulous. Thanks, Rob. Anyone else? Gabby.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with Rob. How do you engage the young people? What type of educational program can you put into school so they can rediscover their country through the food system? It's a language that we need to learn now. I remember when were co-creating this educational problem around food. One of the mothers said to me, it was like, the food system, the contemporary food came with a balance, a lot of food, cheap food, but it didn't come with the manual. And so I think we still need to have a better understanding of what food is today in this contemporary world, in the Anthropocene, as the scientists would say. So if I could offer gather people that we could co-create the food culture that we need to have a better understanding of what it means. In my country, we talk about energy, and food is probably love energy as well. And energy is the power of metamorphosis. So that's from the Polynesian point of view. So what could it be, this mana that we need, this collective mana? What food are we dreaming of? So I guess it would probably start by dreaming. And energy, mana, in the island of New Caledonia, called Lifu, is called men. Men means it's holding all the capacities that you need to transform. So if you gather these two definitions of mana, of energy, mana and men, it means in one mouth bite, you can trigger the energy for metamorphosis and you have all the capacity to do it. So if we can, I guess that's what you're doing, Karen, and that's what this 24-hour around the globe conversation is doing, is people putting people together just to say it's possible. Mission is possible, and there's no doubt about that. So if we bite into it, and the energy will come. So let's eat.
So let's eat
the food culture that we need. And Sashi, Rob, and so many other people are doing a great job in the South Pacific. It's time we gather, and it's happening tonight.
Fabulous, thank you. Sashi.
Thank you. I think one of the things we still are blessed with is we have our elders alive. We are seeing more and more people dying at a younger age, but we're very blessed. We still have people in 70s and 80s and 100. And we have a restaurant called Tukuni, and we have been going out and just visiting traditional people or the elders and asking them for how food used to be. And some of the things are so simple. And Gabby and Robert will share probably that, the real food tastes so good. So just smoking fish and adding lemon to it and eating without any sauces or frying it has a natural taste that just is so good, is so less costly because you're not adding all these other ingredients, and it's really good for our body and soul. And like I said, 30 years ago, there was a step survey, a research done on Fiji population. Indigenous people did not have things like diabetes. Today, the entire Pacific is struggling with NCDs and malnutrition as well. So I think one of the quick things I would say is let's talk to our elders. In Fiji and many parts of the Pacific, each village or each tribe prides themselves in a particular type of dish they used to have, or they pride themselves in a particular plant that they have. They look after, and it's the totem. I think even if we just started taking pride in the traditional plants, the traditional animals we had, the traditional food that we were known for in each of the tribes, that will start reviving our culture and sharing with our children what was so good for our people. And if we lose this moment, in 10 years' time, we'd probably lose that knowledge. So I think it's very crucial for us to capture that, the cooking styles, and then modernizing some of that. For example, the like smoked fish or bamboo cooking is much harder now in modern world, but there can be very simple things that we could utilize and start modernizing some of that to still have traditionally cooked food, which is really good for soul, good for economy, good for our people's health. And the way we are putting in our children's mouth very highly processed food, we are giving them disease instead of health. And none of us want to make our children sick. So I think the quickest would be let's capture all that, let's document it, let's start popularizing it like Gabby and Robert have been doing. And I think we have the potential, all of us, to change the tide around in the Pacific and around the world. I think globally there is quite a raising of consciousness on what is good food. And good food is always natural, simple, basic, without all the add-ons. And it's not only good for us, our children, our planet, but really would provide sustainability for our future.
Thank you so much. Look, thanks everybody. There's so many insights there, and clearly the work that you're all doing is so important, and I thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. There's never enough time for these conversations, but I hope that we create more spaces for people to come together around this, because I really see the power of the food culture pulling the right things that we need forward from agricultural production. And I think we can't forget that power. But the time has come now. The sun is set, as they say, on the first People's Food Summit. And I'd really like to thank you again, Robbie, Gab and Sashi, for the great talanoa tonight and for the contribution that you're all making. Also to my friend Joe, who's in the background uploading videos and things, thanks very much for your help with that. I really appreciate it. And of course to Regeneration International, who have hosted this event and all the partners that got behind it. I wasn't able to stay awake for 24 hours, but every time I dropped into a session, I was either challenged or encouraged. So I think it was really powerful. The good thing is though, because now I have the job to sort of sum up what's happened over the last day, is that I had some spies out there in the world who shared some notes with me from the other sessions and harvested some of those key messages. And one of the aims of the People Summit was to provide a voice for smallholder producers who frequently aren't heard. And that voice came through loud and clear. It was powerful and it was inspiring. So some of the key messages across the different parts of the world included, from here in the Pacific to start off with, that Indigenous farmers, who are a major proportion of smallholders, and Indigenous practices and science and worldviews are particularly critical in food system transformation and building resilience. There was also a discussion around that food production needs to be based on our connectedness, both to each other and to the earth, and that our approaches have to be holistic. In Australia and New Zealand, there were discussions around organic integrity systems and the lack of domestic regulation in both countries. They also talked about innovative ways to assist young people have access to farmland, a universal challenge, access to land. Discussion about permaculture systems to increase agrobiodiversity and efficient water management, and also about nourishing the world with local production and marketing systems. In East Asia, the voice of young people was particularly strong, and they defined themselves as the spirit of life and energy that can lighten up the global organic movement. Smallholders as the mainstay of farming and sustainable food production was really highlighted there. And there was discussions around minimizing the food system to maximize value, community pantries, and empowering tribal peoples. One of the highlights actually came from the Philippines, from Mayor Romel Arnardo. And he gave a video presentation on Arms to Farms, Building Peace Through Organic Agriculture. And that was such an inspiring experience where armed men became organic farming teachers. And the program uses technology like computers and drones to educate and engage youth for the development of organic agriculture. The leadership of IFOAM Asia, IFOAM Organics International, and the International Network of Organic Farmers Organisations was also really featured in East Asia. In South Asia, there were discussions, overviews on the market system for the lowest socioeconomic sectors of society, while at the same time regenerating the whole system. Biodynamic agriculture was an important part of the discussion in South Asia, as was Organic Sri Lanka, and working through the complex issues they have in becoming 100% organic. Vandana Shiva talked about the importance of oneness, the circular economy, and the need to regenerate agriculture, the environment, communities, democracy, and the climate. In Africa, local food sovereignty based on agroecology was discussed, holistic managing and grazing systems, empowering farmers through farmer organisations, and seed saving and the importance of biodiversity. In Europe, transformation of the food system, they said, must be based on involvement of people to people. Of major importance is the decoupling of the food system from the capitalist mindset and creation of an ecological economy, taking into account the basic needs of all people and of the planet. And they also noted that it's a critical period, and that was just mentioned by Sashi. For us as humans, there's a need for transformation from ego-centered to eco-centered. Latin America, again, agroecology and regenerating smallholder farmer systems came up. Seed saving and biodiversity, again, a really important topic. And schools, education for teaching agroecology. And of course, participatory guarantee systems, so important for market access for smallholders. North America, a rich conversation about seed savers who are racing extinction of various varieties, organic farmers, dairy farmers who are at the mercy of multinational corporations, regenerative organic farmers who are looking for economic value out of the benefits that they're bringing to the environment. Also, Black farmers looking for justice in the face of pervasive racism, and Indigenous farmers defending foodways that go back thousands of years from corporations that seek short-term profits at the expense of water and climate. There was also a recognition there that land is power, and the forces of colonization and capitalism have in many cases allowed those who care for the land to be displaced by those who exploit it. And a note that we are all live within the same limits, and we can't live on a dead planet. And there was quite a bit of ocean to cross over from the Americas back to the Pacific. And during that time, video maker Olive Gardner talked about trails of regeneration and presented and talked about several of his videos on regenerative agriculture. And finally, we're back to the dateline in the Pacific Islands, and we've just had this really rich discussion around how to better nourish ourselves through calling on all our biodiversity and our rich food cultures, and how we can then co-create the food culture that we want for the future. The last 24 hours, we've learned of the challenges and victories around the globe, and there are many. There was some necessary reflection on where we are as an organic and regenerative movement, but we saw in each time zone innovations and growing impact of a food system that covers all dimensions of sustainability: ecology, society, economy, culture, and accountability. A food system based on the organic principles of health, ecology, fairness, and care, and the values of diverse food cultures that are regenerating the planet. Through this, we saw the paradigm shift that we need. We saw glimpses of what that future could look like. A food system where it's not just about not leaving somebody behind, but it's about a food system where all of us, including the planet, are nourished and thriving. So thank you all very much for joining. We'll be doing this again, I'm sure. And to close off, just before I hand back to Andre, if we can just have that last little closing video, please. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Karen, and also Sashi, Gabi, and Robert. I think it is actually so wonderful that we ended up where all food should end up, as a unique cuisine, as something that informs all our cultures. And I think one of the sad things that we've lost, or in many parts of the world, are food cultures. And bringing them back, and I think really importantly, like what you're doing, is actually reinventing them. It's just so important. And using our traditional foods and just showing what can be done. I just think it's just so good. And Sashi, I do remember, and I just loved what you were doing with the old breadfruit, the old taro, things that is a waste and just turning it into delicious rotis. There's just things as simple as that. And Robert, I just have to say, I just love the idea of using entertainment as a media. It's so important. And then Gabi, that whole idea of cuisine. I suppose I'll get back to what Robert said. For many of us, we actually regard France as sort of the center of gastronomy. And I just love many ways how you're co-creating the wonderful things of French gastronomy with the incredible, how do you say, products of traditional agriculture from the Pacific, and really inventing an exciting culinary future for us. And really, in the end, I think this is what this event is, that we have been co-creating around the world a positive future. So I want to thank everybody and thank everybody who's actually been involved. Hundreds of people. Actually, we've had, I think we've actually had, in some places, hundreds of thousands of people viewing this. So it's been spectacularly successful. And particularly, I do want to thank Scott, who started it off and got up at 2 a.m. his time, and now Corey, who took over from Scott, and it's now 2 a.m. his time, and he has been up for a very long time. So, guys, thank you so much for holding this all together, and we'll see you next year. So I'd like to say ciao, and thanks so much. It's been great.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.